empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette.
Hello and welcome to my channel. Today what I would like to do is have another unscripted computer side chat. And the topic of this video today is going to be the Borg. And the reason I'm doing this is because on multiple occasions my son asked me, how did the Borg get started? And of course there is no canon explanation for how the Borg got started. But what I can do is I can apply what I learned from history in the real world to kind of infer how something might have occurred in the fictitious world. So, as I've said before, Star Trek is mythology, and one thing that sets mythology apart from just fiction is that mythology has its own kind of internal narrative. It has its own history, its own fictitious history, and it's possible to just keep adding and writing more stories in this fictitious world because it's got a system in place and rules in place and different cultures and different species. So that's what it is. So what I want to do to start off with at first is talk about the history of the Borg that's revealed throughout the series. So, of course, the Borg were introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation. I believe it was in Season 2 in an episode called, I think it was Q Who. And the first exposure to the Borg was a result of Q sending the Enterprise D out to the Delta Quadrant. And in that first episode where the Borg appear, there were a few things that were revealed about them right from the beginning. One is they have a collective consciousness. Two is they are part mechanical. And three is they're way more advanced technologically than human beings. Now, of course, the way that they were first introduced, it was presented as though they were not at all interested in the people, but just the technology. They saw the Enterprise as something that they could use, and so they tried to take it, or first they started by cutting pieces of it out, and it didn't seem at all like they were interested in assimilating alien cultures. And of course, the Borg are seen again in Best of Both Worlds. So in Best of Both Worlds, the Borg are not just interested in the human technology, but they're also interested in the humans. But there's some other things that are revealed, like they're not interested in assimilating individuals. They're only interested in assimilating entire cultures. It's implied that they don't really do things piecemeal, and the only reason that they focused on Picard was because they wanted to have a spokesman to ostensibly convince the humans to join them, which is kind of funny because obviously that's not going to work. So then the third time that we see the Borg, well, apart from those Borg that have kind of broken off from the collective later in Star Trek The Next Generation, the Borg that the episode with Hugh, and then the episodes with Lore where Lore is manipulating the Borg. So apart from that, the next time we really see the Borg is in the First Contact movie, Star Trek First Contact. And in that movie, the Borg are even more deadly and horrific than they were in Star Trek The Next Generation. The movie introduces a new technique for assimilation that didn't seem to exist previously, and that is the nanoprobes, where they inject their victims with these tubes, and then they inject them with nanites, which begin the work of assimilating, and it's almost like a disease, the way that they're assimilated into the collective. It's like a disease, but a disease of a technical nature, and you can see the stuff bursting out of their skin and all that kind of stuff. So the Borg definitely became more deadly, and then after First Contact, the next big encounters with the Borg happens in Voyager, where they go out to the Delta Quadrant. So in Voyager, they do spend a lot of time dealing with the Borg, and of course they get 7 of 9 in the crew. And there's a few things that are revealed in Voyager. Well, I should have mentioned earlier with First Contact, another thing that's introduced is the notion of the Borg having a central intelligence, which is the Queen. And the Borg Queen is not so much like a aristocracy in the human sense. It's more like the queen of a hive, like an insect nest, like ants or bees, something like that. So Voyager has a lot more experience with the Borg. And this is where I want to get into some of the cultural revelations. And one thing that you notice about the Delta Quadrant is the Borg are not the only parasitic species that lacks empathy. There's also the Vidians, which they subsist off of other species by harvesting their body parts. There's these guys that I forget the name of. I think the episode they appeared in was called Scientific Method, but basically they do experiments on aliens that are passing through their space in order to increase their scientific knowledge and their medical knowledge. And they do all kinds of experiments on the Voyager crew. Some of the crew die. And then there's another group of aliens that actually look just like humans. I forget what these guys are called, but they, one by one, they replace the crew of Voyager with themselves. And what they say is that the way they acquire new colonies and ships is by taking them from others. And these guys have at least a little bit of empathy because when they replace crews and settlers, they actually put them in a holographic environment which is comfortable and benign for them. But of course, it's still prison, and that's still a parasitic way of existence, just kind of feeding off of others and taking their stuff. And then the other really big parasitic species, apart from the Borg, are these aliens that appear in the episode called Workforce. And once more, I forget what they're called. I'll mention it in the slideshow. But these guys actually, what they do is they take aliens that are passing through, and they wipe their memories, give them a new set of memories, and then put them into the labor force. And some of their technology actually kind of looks a little bit Borgish. And I'll put pictures of that in the slideshow if I can find it. But I mention all this to say that, I can see how the Borg would have developed in the Delta Quadrant because there already seems to be a trend towards parasitism out there, much more so than what you see in the Alpha Quadrant. I don't know if the average viewer noticed that, but I noticed that. I noticed the common threads. So how do the Borg get started? Well, nobody knows. There's no canon explanation. And since the Star Trek universe is over and not likely to ever be picked up again, there probably never will be a canon explanation. And I'm actually fine with them leaving it mysterious. That's okay. But just for the sake of mental exercise, I'm going to go ahead and kind of infer an origin to the Borg based on the Star Trek universe. And so if they told me, hey, Ivor, work out an origin story for the Borg for us, this is what I would come up with. So I imagine, that the Borg started off as probably just one culture or one planet. And it may have started before, it could have started either before or after these people achieved space flight. I'm not really sure. But there's an episode where they bring these aliens called Vardoir, who went into stasis hundreds of years ago. They bring them out of stasis, and one of the things that they say is that the Borg were less deadly in the past, and they didn't have nearly as much territory as they now have. And obviously, that would be the case. They must have started with a lot less because we know that from all the available lore that they've been constantly expanding. So how would they get started? How would it work? Well, they must have started with at least one species. That species may or may not have been an interstellar culture. It's hard to say. And it probably doesn't matter. if they were already an interstellar culture, they probably had not expanded very far, and they might have been fairly homogeneous. But there's no Borg, right? And at this point, there's the original founding species, but the technology that forces them all into the collective network has not yet been created. So obviously it must have started with that. We know that the nanites were added, sometime between the Next Generation series and the First Contact movie. So in the past, they would have had to use other methods to assimilate. And here's my theory. My theory is that whoever was the government, like whoever, just like now, okay, let's say this, just like the current timeline, or the present timeline, where people do not voluntarily join the Borg, and the Borg don't ask anyone if they want to join. They don't really provide any incentives to join. They just conquer and they force people into it. So if they don't exist in the first place, how do they force people into it? And who does the forcing? Well, the most likely culprit would be the government. Whoever is the government of those people, that would later become the Borg. And my theory is this. There was a government that wanted to have more and more control, which is pretty much what governments do. It's in the nature of government. They probably started by cracking down on freedom of speech. But, freedom of speech is a threat to any government, but it's more than just speech that they want to go after. So how do you stop? What is the root of speech? Well, the root of speech is thought. So if you really want to crush freedom of speech and get rid of dissent before it happens, you need to get rid of freedom of thought. So probably what happened is they started to create something like a network, like a Wi-Fi, maybe a subspace network, depending on how advanced they were. And then they wanted to hook people up to it and probably say, this is for your own good. And, once we get everybody into this computer network, then we'll make algorithms to make sure that they don't think the wrong things. And maybe the way they marketed it at first was, just take this brain implant and you'll be able to access the internet, the database. You'll have all the knowledge you need instantly at your disposal. And of course, if they do this, they don't have to worry about spending money on law enforcement or any kind of policing efforts, or even bother with courts or any such traditional aspects of government and control, because all the regular people are going to be hooked up to this computer network, and they'll have algorithms making sure they don't think the so-called wrong things. So my guess is it was an attempt to solve all the social problems by controlling all of the regular people. And then I imagine the ruling class thought, hey, this is going to be a party for us. Now we can do whatever we want to whoever we want, and we don't have to worry about not only anybody criticizing us, but that's it. We've solved rebellion, we've solved crime, and like the regular people, we've solved class issues, we've solved unemployment, because now we have algorithms putting people where we need them to be, and people that we don't need, maybe we just deactivate, and nobody can say anything about it because everybody is controlled. So I think at first they would have a computer kind of controlling all of the regular people. And then since it's Star Trek, probably over time, this network of control develops into a collective consciousness. And for a while, the ruling class enjoys themselves, but then the collective consciousness decides, hey, why should we allow these individuals who exist outside of the network to have any say over us in our system? Let us also assimilate them, and whatever worthwhile knowledge and contributions they have to make will be inside the collective. There's no reason to let these people exist separately. And so the ruling class, in like one night of terror, ends up being assimilated. And of course, the collective consciousness then either they are already, let's do two scenarios. One is they're already an interstellar culture when the collective consciousness is developed. Well, now instead of dealing with other cultures as equals and negotiating with them, they just start conquering them and taking what they want. After all, if you have force, negotiations are irrelevant. And as somebody said, here on Earth, the strong do what they wish and the weak endure what they must. So there we go. And of course, as they conquer, they might actually start with weaker cultures first and gobble them up kind of piecemeal, and then they can move on to stronger cultures. And every time they assimilate a culture, they're going to advance probably exponentially. So it's not long before they're the most advanced civilization around, if you can call their mode of living civilization. So there we are. Now, the other scenario is the collective consciousness takes over before the Borg have space travel capability. Well, so the next thing they do in that scenario, they say, well, we've got this planet, we need to expand our territory. Maybe what they first do is they start expanding into space in order to mine resources. Then they encounter other cultures, sample their technology, and decide to start taking over those other cultures as well. So that's my theory on how the Borg got started. I think it was probably started as a means of social control, which got out of hand and got out of control from the people who implemented it. And I think it's a pretty good theory because, again, most people are not willingly going to join a thing like this. And of course, over time, as they advance and they get to be more dehumanizing and dehumanized. Of course, they originally were not human to begin with, but it won't be long before they start cutting off arms and legs. They don't really cut off legs, but cutting off arms and gouging out eyes, in order to tailor the drones to perform specific functions. And the thing is, if something like this were to ever exist, where you had a chip inside your brain that is a gateway for external control, they could make you just submit to whatever thing they want to do without anesthetic. Like, okay, it's time for your upgrade, citizen 0045. Report to medical facility here, and then they guide you via a GPS to the medical facility, to the table they want you to be on, and there they start the process. And no need to give you an anesthetic because they're in direct control of your brain. So no matter how much it hurts, it's not like you're going to be able to move or scream or anything. No, you're just going to lie there as they saw through your body and stab you with things and gouge out your eye. Whatever else they want to do, they're just going to do it. So that's my theory. I think it's pretty reasonable. If there's any, I would be interested in any feedback. If anybody has any thoughts they want to add or feels like I missed anything, or if you just disagree or agree, do let me know. If you disagree, I'd be interested to hear why. And I think that's it. Thanks for listening.